everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited to present to you about a very important topic. We're going to do a rapid training video on how to help and therapeutically support young people who are presenting with problematic gaming behaviours. My name is Jordan Foster. I'm a clinical psychologist and the managing director of ySafe. We provide cyber safety education and consultation to schools, not-for-profits, corporate organisations. I have a background in working with young people with problematic gaming behaviour in a therapeutic sense, but also provide lectures at universities across Australia, medical consortiums and conferences about therapeutically engaging young people. I've written a chapter of a book that I'm going to make available to you as well, just to reinforce some of this learning. So I'm going to provide a 10-minute quick video for you about some of the most important things to recognize and to implement when engaging therapeutically with young people with problematic gaming. This is a 10-minute video made from derived from our longer training video, which I'll talk about at the end. But here are the key things that you need to know when getting started on working with young people with gaming distressing problems. When we're engaging therapeutically with young people, one of the things that we often do, which isn't necessarily helpful, is just focus on the internal factors or the personal factors that might be driving that gaming behaviour. But often we miss the opportunity to actually help young people understand what are some of the external factors that might be influencing their gaming behaviours. Now, there's some really interesting research that discusses this in the context of what's called push and pull factors. Push and pull factors, it's too much of a topic that we can go into right now, but it's a very helpful thing to understand in regards to framing your conceptualization for working with young people. But here's an example of an external factor or a pull factor, are the features that are built into gaming platforms. So some of the most popular gaming platforms actually have, by design, features that are designed essentially to ensure player engagement. Some of these things that you might actually have heard of before, some might be new because they're quite covert in some ways. Decision points is a really common one, so it actually minimises the amount of options or decision points that a player has, which then means that a young person doesn't have a cognitive cue to know when to stop playing. Variable rewards is a really commonly known one, so actually allowing rewards to come at random intervals that are unpredictable, which drives user engagement. Sandbox style games actually have addictive features to them, which means that there's no natural endpoint to a sandbox game. We find that old games used to have a storyline and it ended, whereas sandbox style games just continue on. If a game is free to use, it increases the accessibility, and that means younger people can play and play often and as much as they like, because they don't have to necessarily purchase access to the game. The more social play is involved with friends or not, or just people who they've met online, increases time spent gaming, and online streaming as well. I'm going to go into a little bit more details to one of these factors here, because if you're a gamer, you might actually relate to this. Game developers will capitalize on cognitive biases to ensure player engagement. One of the most common ones is this. Many developers actually have built an algorithm into their games, this is for most of the popular games, that can identify that moment when a player is about to win. And in that moment, they actually increase the difficulty exponentially to encourage a loss. And cognitively, this is what we call a near-miss effect. Because the way that our brain processes this is if we almost won something, then it's a near miss, as opposed to if we lost immediately, we would actually think that that task is quite difficult, maybe less likely to do it. So a near miss actually results in that player repeating the same behaviour. The reason I think that these are really important, these types of psychological functions built into games, is because it decreases the stigma for the person, the client, who might be otherwise feeling like addiction and all the media hype around something like that, to make them feel quite confronted by it and that it's their fault and can derive some shame. Whereas talking about some of these features actually helps build rapport, but minimises this embarrassing experience that young people might experience, because it's not their fault, necessarily. There are other features or things that are feeding into this, but this is something that's working against them. I always find that this is a great place to start when we start addressing gaming in the therapeutic sense. Conceptualize problematic gaming. One of the things that I notice when working with students in particular is that one of the first questions is, how many hours would a person be playing games for in order to know that they had a problem? And actually what we see in research is that very few researchers are encouraging people to focus on the sheer amount of time that's spent on gaming, because that actually doesn't provide us with a lot of information. And in fact, if you look at meta-analysis and lit reviews, what we actually find is that the two features that are encouraged to look for in terms of problematic gaming in a therapeutic sense is, one, psychological distress. So how much psychological distress is that behaviour causing in a way for that client? But the second one, which is incredibly important, is the impact on psychosocial functioning. So how is that gaming behaviour actually influencing other important areas of that person's life? So social relationships, leisure activities, employment or education, physical health and hygiene. And what we often find is for people who are experiencing problematic gaming behaviours, particularly when it's causing them psychological distress, is an impact on these factors here. So we might find that young people become disengaged with their social relationship or stop participating in leisure activities that they otherwise would normally do. They can often find, you'll see a lot of school absence or difficulty maintaining employment, physical health and hygiene issues. Gamers a lot of the time do snack as opposed to eat structured meals because it allows for disrupted gameplay. They decrease their physical exercise many times. So all of these factors we might see gaming influences that. So instead of focusing on the amount of time spent gaming, we might focus on the impact of the gaming behaviour on other facets or areas of that young person's life. When it comes to screening and assessment, this is one of the, in terms of research, the most psychometrically sound scale that's available at the moment. Reliability and validity for this is quite strong at the moment, so the Internet Gaming Disorder Scale. However, I would still discourage you from really using a measure like this and actually focus on qualitative assessment. Largely this is because at the moment gaming addiction is still not a diagnosable term. The ICD and DSM have proposed criteria at the moment, but because there's so much research going on as to a consensus to the diagnostic criteria, it's difficult then to have a scale for measuring how problematic a person's gaming behaviours are if we don't actually have a set diagnostic criteria to compare it to. So we still need to be looking for qualitative information that we're providing during an assessment. So the things that I would personally encourage you to be looking for are factors like this: exploring the opportunity costs and impacts on gaming. This would be looking at things like the impact that the gaming behaviour has had on having to make sacrifices in other areas of that person's life. So for example, social relationships or physical activity, or not holding down employment, and the actual impacts of gaming. When you look at this, it could be things like social relationships, family relationships. You often find that for young people in particular who are still living with family, that it can create a lot of family conflict, the gaming behaviour. Now, the child probably won't see it as the game's fault, so they might see it as the parent's fault, but either way, we're just looking at the impact on that person's life, not necessarily the place of blame. Focusing on gaming behaviour in the context of lifestyle problems. So some of the goals that we might want to be setting during this initial process is that person's goal might not actually be to decrease gaming at all. It could be to increase social relationships, and sometimes, or at least time spent invested in them. And taking an approach that is less direct about the gaming behaviour and more holistic about that person's overall well-being can actually be helpful, decreasing some of the resistance that comes from young people. Identify the motivation for gameplay. If I want you to get anything out of this training, it is this: you need to understand the function of the behaviour. What purpose and does that gaming behaviour have for that client? And you might find that it could be things like it connects them with a more inclusive social group, because gaming often is associated with a strong social community. It could be that that young person is suffering from significantly low self-esteem, and playing in the online world actually provides them an opportunity to build a persona who is very intelligent or strong or confident, whatever it is that they value personally. And so it can actually provide a form of escapism for other things that might be causing distress in their real life, so to speak. It could be that they have a love interest on that particular gaming platform, and so that particular love interest could drive the amount of time that they want to spend online. You need to understand the function, the purpose of that gaming behavior for that person, because if you don't, you're missing key factors that actually might be maintaining the behavior. You don't actually know it and you can't address it at all. Maintaining factors are really important to take into account. Assess the frequency of gameplay just as a point of understanding, not necessarily because the sheer quantity has any indication of the problem, but just for a baseline understanding. Now, here are some intervention steps and ways to provide support for young people. Now, again, because the field of research is so new for this area, we're still looking at what are the most robust treatment models. But at the moment, we are comparing, literature is comparing gaming addiction as a behavioural disorder, which is comparable to gambling addiction. So the general models of therapy and intervention would involve these steps or techniques. Psychoeducation, of course. This is a really important part and step of building rapport for young people. We want to normalise the difficulty that a young person might experience to get off that game or stop playing, and setting clear and realistic expectations for therapy. We have to make sure that we're on the same page. I've had clients come to me before and they either want to stop gaming cold turkey, which research tells us that in the long term is actually very difficult, or they might want to improve other areas of their life and to get back some of the things that they've sacrificed without changing their gaming behavior at all. So you need to make sure that you're very clear on your therapeutic goals. Cognitive behavioral therapy is the suggested at this point in time therapeutic approach. We want to address any distortions in beliefs or unhelpful thinking styles that are feeding into perpetuating the behaviour. Behaviour activation is a very important part of therapeutic approach, largely because gaming behaviour is so pervasive that we would want to start integrating other behaviours that are going to be helpful to support that young person's well-being. Identifying alternative positive coping strategies. One of the things that I see often, again, helping students or clinicians is focusing on just decreasing game time as opposed to first focus on increasing positive coping strategies. A lot of young people use gaming as a coping strategy in of itself. So if we were to just set goals to decrease it and not provide alternatives, then we're going to very likely result in cognitive distress experienced by a young person. And then motivational interviewing. So addressing ambivalence, again, this links back to setting realistic goals about therapy and any ambivalence where they are in the behaviour change cycle. And a decision matrix I find is incredibly helpful to understand the detrimental aspects of gaming, but also the detrimental aspects of stopping. This really helps a young person really reflect on their behaviour. And I always like to use this as a tool within therapy in terms of identifying what the benefits of gaming are and trying to at least maintain some of those benefits or replace them somewhere else, whilst also decreasing some of the detrimental aspects of it. So not just one or the other, but really being holistic in that approach. Lastly, building rapport. So avoid passing judgment. That's a pretty gold standard rule. Don't pretend like you know if you don't. It's a really good opportunity to ask clients what they like about that game. What is that game? How does it work? Because most adults don't actually ask them that. So it makes them feel like you're on side. Show interest and give that young person a voice. A lot of the time, young people present because of adults in their life, and they often feel like the adult is the problem, not the gaming. So show interest in what they get out of it and explore those lifestyle elements. Refrain from demonizing the game, understand the function of the game. Hopefully by now I've drilled this into you. So what's the benefit? What purpose does it serve? What are the maintaining factors? Explore and validate the benefits of use, and avoid assuming that technology is the problem. It could be that the parent relationship is a problem for them, and so you're exploring how that could be made better. And gaming might come into that, but it might not directly either. Okay, there's your snapshot. In our general staff training, which is usually at least an hour, we would be exploring factors like this. So a case study presentation and conceptualization, so an actual workshop about a difficult gaming addiction, problematic gaming client, and how you would work with the resistance, how you'd come up with a therapeutic plan. Exploring how to work with comorbidities and maintaining factors. Comorbidities is a very important factor to consider when working with a young person with problematic gaming. In fact, most research shows at the moment that young people will have some sort of comorbid disorder, usually an affective disorder or a developmental disorder like ASD or ADHD, and the maintaining factors. We're looking at the push and pull model, which is a really helpful way of conceptualizing the factors that are feeding into that gaming behavior, so particularly in reference to the maintaining factors, and it really helps with conceptualizing and developing a therapeutic plan. And just more of the psychological design factors that drive gaming behaviors. This is a great way to educate young people, but it's also a great way to engage them therapeutically, and just generally quite interesting. It's difficult to stop or minimize, I suppose, gaming behaviors when we don't fully understand what's maintaining them or perpetuating them. And sometimes it's not actually to do with the young person itself, but the gaming developers. So interesting to have a look at. We offer these sessions, so whether it's myself or one of the other psychologists on our team, but we offer these sessions on webinars or face-to-face. So if you think that you would benefit in knowing much more about therapeutically identifying and working therapeutically with young people with problematic gaming behaviors, if you think your staff within your organisation, your boss, whoever would benefit from this, please feel free to get in contact with us at information@ysafe.com.au. We can certainly organise a training session for you. You can have a look at our website, www.ysafe.com.au. I have also linked on this page below the chapter that I wrote that provides a little bit more information for you about this particular topic. But if you would like to have a training session, we work in small not-for-profits right up to big corporate organisations, so we can help you with whatever you need. Otherwise, please feel free to get in contact with us, have a look at our Facebook page, have a look at our website, and email us if you have any other questions or queries. We're very happy to help. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been my absolute pleasure talking with you, and I really hope that you've learned some helpful tips and tricks to help young people with problematic gaming behaviour.